Procreate's alpha lock feature and clipping mask feature are similar and they are both awesome, but there's a really important difference between them that you're going to want to keep in mind as you're doing your art. If you don't, you could learn the hard way that they are different, and that can be frustrating. So, we're going to talk about how they are different, how they work, and how you can use them to make some awesome art. So, firstly, let's look at alpha lock. So, if you look at alpha lock or you click on your layer, that's this menu will appear. Alpha lock is like right here in the middle. Go ahead and click on that. We're going to be using this big flower petal here to demonstrate. As you can see in the little layer image, a grid has turned on behind it. That means that the alpha lock is enabled. And when you have the alpha lock enabled, I can, let's say, go in and add some shadows. I want to add some dimension to this flower. So I'm just going in here and adding that color. All right. I'm like, okay, that's cool. That's great. Let's say I, close this image. I come back to it in a few days. I can no longer undo these shadows because I've closed Procreate. And I'm like, oh no, I don't like that. I want to change that. Well, the problem is I now have drawn on my layer. So I don't have another version of this layer to go back to. It has now been drawn on. And so those shadows are permanent. So, part of the other issue too is if I go and I try to erase them, like, well, maybe I can just erase it. The problem is I'm going to be then erasing my entire um, everything on that layer, not just the shadow. So also my flower as well. So that can be kind of a bummer. If I want to get rid of it, one option I have is to select the color I had before, keep alpha lock on, and I can just go back over and recolor that. And now it's like fresh as new. Depending on how complicated your art is or how much you've drawn over it with alpha lock, that may not be an option for you. So keep in mind that alpha lock is permanent. Um, some ways that, like, I really like alpha lock, and so some ways that I get around this is, let's say, at this point I can't undo it. So let's say it is fresh. I have not done anything yet, but I want to use alpha lock. What I'll just do is I'll go ahead and duplicate this layer. That way I have two copies of it. So if I use alpha lock on one of these layers and I don't like it, I can just go in and delete that and I still have an original there. So keep that in mind. Alpha lock will permanently add to your layer. And so you just want to be careful with that in case there are reasons why you wouldn't want to use it. Some of the perks I really do like of alpha lock is if I have this enabled, I can come in here and just like recolor this whole thing really quickly, give it some nice like different dimensions if I didn't want to use the recolor or the color drop for some reason, or if I'm like very confident that I want to change the colors, or if I want to add something to it and I'm like, yeah, let me get those spots here. These are permanent because I love them. They're the best ever little spots. Just keep in mind alpha lock is permanent. So let's say you're not as confident as that you want to add neon dots to your flower. This is where clipping mask comes in. So I'm going to turn off alpha lock. So what's important with clipping mask is that you are going to need to add an additional layer. So you cannot just enable clipping mask on the layer you want to use. That's what will happen. It will not work out for you. So what you're going to do is pick the layer that you want to be using, and then just click the plus button that will add a layer above it. And then at that point, go ahead and click on that layer and click clipping mask. Essentially what this does is it creates an alpha lock type of feature. I will only be able to draw on the layer below it. But at this point, it's going to be on a completely different layer. So if I come in here and I want to create some shadows and some dimension to this piece of work, I can come in here, add these shadows, and I'm like, cool, this is the best thing ever. I'm gonna love it. But I come back in a few days. I'm like, ooh, that's not so great. What I can do is I can just come in here. This is on its own separate layer. So I can either just click the clear button and that's gone, or I can just delete the layer entirely and I still have my original. This can work not only for shadows and whatnot, but also if you want to add, different types of elements to your design, without messing up your original. If I wanted to like add some spots and I'm like, yeah, I love these spots, and I'm really into all the dots and whatnot. And, I come back to it a few days later and I'm not a huge fan of it, um, I can then just clear it or delete it. So it is like adding another layer, but it is similar to Alpha Lock that if I cover my entire canvas, I am not going to be able to draw outside of that additional outside of that layer that I've picked that the clipping mask is being applied to. So the clipping mask really just gives you some more flexibility to create something that is a little less permanent so that you can change it in the long run, whereas Alpha Lock is going to be a permanent change to your layers. Again, you may want to use it depending on if you have some layer limits going on, you've kind of maxed out your layers, you're really confident about your changes. Um, but clipping mask can give you a little bit more flexibility. All right, I hope that was helpful. If you liked this video, if you could please hit that like button. And if you want to hit that subscribe button, keep coming back to Adventures with Art. We love to dive into Procreate and nerd out about all of the cool things that it can do. So I'd love to see you here next time.